Hi guys, Hengist here from House of Hengist Comics, and a big welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing really well. Today it's Blitzkrieg, and we're looking at Operation NIWY and the Battle of Bodgne. But first, as usual, we're going to look at the news. Today what I'd like everyone to do is freeze some of these frames and to start thinking about the sort of interface and the similarities between this and World War I. Were there any real similarities? And I've tried to feed this into the Second World War map, and I'm finding this quite interesting actually, and quite stimulating. I mean, one of the things is obviously the type of warfare is much more mobile and faster, but so it was in the early part of World War I, and we've got very large forces and different localized and operational tactics. We've also got the biggest battle in history about to occur at the Battle of Hanau, and I'd like people to look back at the defences. We've looked at Eben Amal, we've looked at Baptiste and the forts surrounding them. Key to this is Namur and Neuchâtel, and also the fact that panzers weren't considered to be able to get through this. Again, if we look at Neuchâtel, excuse my French, and we examine these in contrast to the Belgian forces, it's quite interesting. So have a look at those. There's also, of course, general panic breaking out, even though it's day 1, May the 10th, 1940. I think there was some expectation the Germans were coming. Okay, let's now move on and look at the Belgian forces today. Well, today our focus is on the Chasseurs Ardennes, who will be confident trained. Here's a picture of King Leopold. A huge amount of weight rested on his shoulders, and he had a policy of arms neutrality, so to speak. It was still hostile with the French, had forces on the French border just up until the last moment, and the German border until assurances were met. The Chasseurs Ardennes are well known for their green beret and their boar motif. Here's some pictures of some of their uniform and their sort of colours that can be taken from one of the museum, and again their cap badge here, which I think says resist and die. Effectively they had mobile elements with their tractors to tow their guns and some of their infantry, and the T-13 tank destroyer, a very powerful gun on a carriage effectively with limited ammunition, and it's sort of overloaded and unreliable as such. There's a picture of some Germans inspecting a captured one. The Belgian troops, they've got about 3 platoons, some mortars, machine guns, and they have a little scout platoon as well defending their bridge. Now they're cut off, and I'll explain that later on, and haven't received any other orders. The German forces today consist of 2 effective companies, a reconnaissance force and a German motorised infantry force with some pioneers. They're going to be tasked with building a bridge basically for this scenario, and it's an interesting one because the task itself will earn them points, and how they do it with no real artillery other than 2 mortars is going to be quite interesting to see. They've also got an 88 which is coming up. As you can see from these photographs, many didn't have the gun shield. Okay, let's get into the set now and the research. Well, it was Rommel and Guderian against the Belgian Chasseurs Ardennes, as it says here, from the 10th of May. And the bridge at this location has been blown. So this is some photos of Bodgne, which helped us sort of build the set and try and construct it as it was. It's quite difficult. Again, we couldn't find a huge amount of information, other than obviously the chasseurs here, as I've said, were cut off and basically had to stand. So immediately we go to Google Maps, which of course are contemporary, and we have to allow for that. Look for maps and source information and try and build up a general picture. It's difficult when we're trying to do this very quickly. But the key to this operation was Goering had come up with this plan after all these gliders had been used, of dropping Brandenburgers and other troops. And this was basically designed to attack behind the enemy lines so that the Rollbahn could be opened up for the tanks and they could get everything through the Ardennes very quickly. But the mission of placing 2 Brandenburgers, and I think a lot of troops from Großdeutschland as well, into these aircraft didn't have a huge impact, so to speak. Some troops managed to get where they are and started cutting the lines, and that's why the Chasseurs Ardennes are cut off in this sector. we had to build maps up. We got it all wrong at first, and we started to rebuild it. We also had to basically get figures, and we got those from QRF, and they came out really well, and I've done some stuff basically on the Facebook page. Let's look at the set now. A very long river. It's narrow and fordable, but not for tanks and vehicles. It's an 8-foot table, and so basically we've got 3 platoons with mortars behind. They're all dug in. There's a lot of cover. We tried to create as close as we could with what we have. A lot of woods, a lot of wire, and minefields on this side of the fence. So it's going to be quite a difficult ask for the Germans, as you can see. Also, basically, the bridge is blown before we start. So let's get into the mission briefing and what's that all about. Well, Campaign Sam basically came up with this sort of map from which we basically started to work out what we were going to do. Build a new bridge gives them, and 2 exit points, and that will give them effectively 15 points for the task rather than the objective. To get those panzers moving is critical here, both in time and basically as part of the operational scope and plan. And then we've got the 2 objectives, as you can see, the music house and obviously this Bastogne road, as I've called it. The Chasseurs Ardennes behind wire, dug in. They've got their scouts sort of as the only reserve. It's a very long sector they've got to defend. And of course the bridge is blown, as I've said, in advance. Importantly, as the kradshutzen move up, we've had to use reaction for reserve forces coming on as to whether they're aware or go straight down the road. But using Achtung Panzer, we've got a whole host of rules. So if you freeze this, you can see what we've got, from suppression to overwatch and so much more. So without further ado, let's get into the battle action now, guys. And it's a really good game. Well, the Germans have got about 4 platoons in total, 2 kradshutzen and 2 motorised infantry and 1 pioneer platoon with bridging equipment, as they are basically pounding down this road with the reconnaissance at the front. They've got about 4 armoured cars in total, and you can just see there the lorries beginning to appear. The kradshutzen immediately dismount and move into some of the fields, and are staring ahead across a minefield towards the bridge, which is still burning, and they can see the enemy there ahead, dug in and prepared. There's no shock and awe in effect, and immediately the 6 rads go up as far as they can onto the bridge and start opening fire as the Germans sort of dismount and start moving very, very quickly into positions. They also get a platoon in reserve, which makes its reaction test and therefore moves up onto the hill. As you can see, the boats are there. The 2 mortars, that's the only artillery they've got, are going to be firing a lot of smoke whilst this is being undertaken, and the 6 rads causing huge amounts of damage already. The Germans don't take many casualties initially. They're keeping everything sort of down and suppressed, and they managed to get their kradshutzen along the riverbank line. At the moment, effectively, the Belgians have done very little. They're waiting to see exactly where the attacks are going to come so that they can manoeuvre and counterattack. They trigger an overwatch and open fire with some heavy machine guns and knock out about 4 or 6 men, I think it was, in total. But they start to notice that they're going to be bridged not just by the bridge, but also further down towards the wood line. And also at this ford position here, where we can see the German infantry have come down. So obviously they start to redeploy to try and deal with that, and then spring their ambush. And they were looking for several turns to find a good position to ambush, open fire, but it's ineffective. Basically the Germans start moving down this hill, which is very steep. You can see how steep it is in some of these photographs, and the boats are starting to be hauled up by both the infantry and the engineers to make a bridging crossing. The infantry platoon comes down out of the woods and basically is trying to cross at the same point where the bridge position is. We've also got mortar fire now ranging in on the T-13s, and the Germans now cross at the stream, and they've got to take 5+ saves whilst they're in that water. They haven't got boats. A heavy machine gun opens fire but doesn't do much damage because their own heavy machine guns have suppressed the 3rd platoon, which is on the far right. But the Belgians now counterattack after a devastating round of fire. And it's only thanks to the one I see who's way out on a limb on that flank, and he counterattacks, and unfortunately the Belgians fail. But that doesn't disturb them. They've only lost 2 or 8 men in that battle. Meanwhile, at the bridgehead, effectively we've got the tanks firing machine guns with the infantry and everything, trying to stop these bridges being built. However, the Belgians, who had failed their counterattack, had allowed the Germans to get into a house. Now they're very depleted, only about 8 or 9 men, and they assault, and everything goes wrong. They lost every single team in that assault against the building, and effectively then fail motivation and break, leaving the Germans in at control of basically one objective. And now it looks really bad because the fire just hasn't been powerful enough to really stop the Germans, and the Germans managed to make a really good crossing. They haven't lost that many infantry. They were stopped by the tank that came out for a while, but then we see the panzers arrive, and really the Germans basically now are in a very good position. They've got an 88 on the hill, even though it's just prepping around to fire, and we allow them to fire airburst if they have to as well. No gun shield at this period. The mortars have been highly effective with both smoke and HE, and the 6 and 8 rads have really done their work today. You know, with the 20 mils covering the infantry, it was very well executed. But basically there were some mistakes in the game which did affect the play a little bit, but we got through those, and I really enjoyed the game. I mean, it was very unlucky at that house, really unlucky to lose all your teams, you know, from defensive fire. But at the same point in time, the Germans had done very well with the reconnaissance elements of their force. Effectively, the Belgians, the Ardennes, start to withdraw. That was a tactical decision as well, and a realistic one given the circumstances, and there'll be an action later. But the Germans push off the side of the, effectively make a skill check and remove the wreck that's on the bridge, which was really put there quite sacrificially to slow them down. So it's a German victory. It would have been 20 points, but only 15 was awarded by Campaign Sam. And so let's look into the postscript. I mean, we've learned a lot from this operation alone. Obviously, the nature of the German operations was all geared to get those roads and bridges as quickly as possible so they could keep these roll bonds moving. And, you know, this is a very different type of warfare. It's never been really attempted before, this blitzkrieg of combined arms at the spear point. And although there's a big image of the tour of, you know, France 1940, it doesn't look as easy as that. And when we're looking at it as well, that terrible beast, that Char B, is to be feared. And let's never forget, guys, that all these that fell, because we want to keep this history alive. So from me, from the gang, and for everyone else, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll have more action coming up from Belgium. So it's over and out for me, and it's bye for now. Best wishes.